All right, my name is Katie Bradford Osborne. I am the founder of Roaring Artist Gallery. We're a virtual gallery that exhibits exclusively women artists. And we are so excited today to be here with Tulika Ladsariya. She's our current solo exhibition, Storytelling, and it is such an awesome exhibition. So I'm really excited to have her here to do an artist talk with us today. She'll tell us a little more about her art and she'll take us on a little tour as well through the exhibition. I'm really excited about this. So I hope that everyone who's here has seen the exhibition already, but if you haven't, it'll be a real treat to get to see it with her and then to get to see it afterwards as well. We will start with the artist statement. So Tulika was born in Mumbai. She's living in Chicago. She says, I explore the feelings of belonging, loss, and acceptance of the notion of home as a space situated within the liminal. As the migrant, I often question what we carry with us and what gets left behind to better understand how legacies are passed through memories, stories, and intangible experiences of living between cultures. I study borders as layered abstract spaces and address the psychological and spatial impact of these lines to facilitate dialogue and connections across communities in order to create experiences that allow for healing the shared sense of estrangement. My art now poses questions like, can we truly ever cross borders and make homes? Can we design spaces larger than small bubbles of like-minded people? Can we find cohesiveness and kinship despite our differences? When we tell our own stories, it shapes who we are, how we grow, survive, and blossom. In this exhibition titled Storytelling, I draw on my personal narratives to muse over socioeconomic divides in our macrocosm. Nostalgia and the experience of otherness are reflected in my work across different media, primarily acrylic paintings and ceramic. Through my art, I cultivate a sense of home as a place within while maintaining a level of awareness about how perception and externalities shape this space. I think that is one of the most beautiful artist statements that I have read. So I hope that you all will go and read that as well for yourself. That is on the show page as well as Tulika's bio. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you, Tulika. Let me make sure that there we go. You can share your screen.
Thanks, Katie.
All right, take it away.
Yeah. So I'm going to start with sharing a presentation. It's just a little bit about who I am and where I've been and how I reached where I am today. And after that, I can just walk through the exhibition with you, which I think Katie has done a brilliant job of curating. Uh, so that's me, Tulika Ladsariya. I grew up in Mumbai, India, and spent most of my life there. Uh, I started my career in banking and worked with HSBC for a while before making the shift. Went to London to study art for a brief moment, came back to India, worked for an auction house for a little bit, trying to find a balance between art and finance, and soon realized there wasn't a balance. You either could create or, just be someone in finance. And I decided to just go down that journey. I had my first solo show in Mumbai before I moved to the US, and that was in 2009. Uh, I, I still primarily call myself a painter, and I think a lot of my painting, uh, I would say, if I had to box myself, which people request artists to do sometimes, but I would say is figurative abstraction. There are figures or elements of that that keep showing up in my work. I use a lot of text, texture, vivid, bold palettes, and make paintings that reflect on the inner struggle of being a human. A lot of my earlier paintings were the world I saw around me in Mumbai. A lot of scaffolding, a lot of workers, and I feel like the genre was more of me being on the inside and looking on the outside. And I think in the past 2 years, which is where I want to focus this presentation on, I've started going more towards the inside and reflecting that in my work. Um, I think where I'm coming from in a lot of my paintings is addressing borders and seeing how we create these spaces for ourselves, whether they be countries, states, little homes, what these spaces mean to us and how they shape what we've become. This particular piece kind of poured out of me after my last trip to India, where I genuinely felt like I had abandoned my mother and I was part of a different group of people now. And just thinking about what we pass on to our future generations, how much of my motherland and my mother tongue my child will be able to relate to. So, this piece has a lot of Hindi text, me holding my child in a certain way. India is always referred to as motherland, so I've used these borders of India and the US. Uh, then this series was very early in the lockdown where I started working collaboratively with my 4 year old, then 4 year old daughter's drawings, where she has this very obsessive quality to her drawing. And as soon as we started masking, all of her figures started wearing masks. And I think I was looking at drawing in a way as to how children process the world around them as well and try and understand and make sense of what is going on. Uh, and at that time, my mom sent me a little care package. This was close to, early May, where she sent a lot of crochet for Rena, and where we had a lot of strife going on in the US at that point in terms of protests and things, where the care package actually got lost in the mail and it was stolen from the UPS van. And that's a story that I feel fits so well into that narrative about even when we're trying to reach across and create some sort of bond together, it doesn't always get through. And that's when I repurposed some old crochet that she had done, and I started making these pieces with her using her hands constantly, Rena using hers, and me using mine, and collaboratively creating something across oceans and borders. I think this series, personally, to me, is one of my own favorites, and I don't know why. I think it has all those feelings of nostalgia, crossing borders, generations coming together despite the distance between them. So, so I think, and it poured out in a moment of a lot of stress. So I feel like it's personally really, really dear to me. These acrylic boxes are, again, my sister used to visit very often in the US, and she bought these little car boxes for my nephew. And when she was carrying the cars back, obviously she could not fit all the boxes in her suitcases. So she took those and left these behind. And then I repurposed them to create memories of what I remember Bombay always looking like, Mumbai, Bombay, which are these little buildings and structures constantly with that scaffold around them. I love the idea of using some sort of residue in my art, whether it be from dumpsters, whether it be something someone has abandoned. And I feel like the traces of that keep showing up in my work in some way or the other. And the fact that I sometimes use childlike objects and colors, I feel like I try to introduce playfulness in very serious and very dire topics in this way. So these five boxes are a little bit older, but still very, very dear. And I think they fit into this exhibition pretty perfectly. Uh, these are more recent pieces. I think I fell in ceramics after my residency started at Hyde Park Art Center in 2019, the fall of 2019. And it was kind of an instant love. I think there's something very therapeutic, which any ceramicist or person working in clay will tell you about. Uh, just working in that medium, being close to the earth, I made these little vessels that looked like boats. Uh, and I put my mom's crochet as texture in these little boats while I was making them. And one of the things that someone who's doing a studio visit with me told me that you're looking at that liminal space and you're talking about the immigrant accepting this liminal space as home. And that was such a little light bulb moment as to why I was making these things. And I really wanted to put my painting and my sculpture together. Like, I think since I did this program called the Center Program in 2012, I've been desperately trying to break out of the frame of the painting. And this was one of those pieces where I think I just broke free again of that frame in a certain way, because the paint is spilling onto the walls and these little laser cut borders are coming out of it and leading to this liminal space of home. Uh, this was the outcome of that program in 2012, where this piece really started with me remembering the days where I was struggling with the idea of privilege and teaching these slum children who were brought up in slums and they used to work in brick kilns to read and write, and just dealing with the idea of privilege as to who gets what. And again, the same concept where my nephew used to play with Lego and these little children were working in kilns, and how do we bridge that gap? So the 2012 edition of this piece was really me painting these bricks as Lego pieces and writing the stories of what these children used to talk to me about. And the 2020 version ended up being obviously much more political because of the year that we were living in. And I called it Bridges and Walls. And I was still writing these stories, but stories of immigrants uh, who have come to the US, and people who I've spoken to, and kind of kept inscribing these in a very therapeutic way for myself to process these stories and ideas of people. Um, Again, with Fragmented, I ended up using these cornhole thrower game that someone had, I think, in my building, and they threw it out because the wood was rotten, and it was just the back wood that was rotten. So I ended up using these frames and repurposing them, which is, like I mentioned before, something I like to do often. And uh, I was experimenting with laser cut a lot at this point, and I decided to cut very delicately all the states of America. Uh, the first one was really how, that cumulative feeling of division that we were all feeling last year. And I think that we've realized is an innate part of what the US is. Uh, and the second frame really was taking away those borders and just kind of playing with that idea and that palette. Uh, this is, I think, one of Katie's favorite pieces in the show. Again, with the idea of playfulness, just watching states painfully be either red or blue. And while I was thinking about titling this work, one of the titles that came to mind was No Room for Purple. And that's something that was coming across very clearly last year. And this, I always wanted to make a kind of mobile that hangs from the ceiling suspended. And I made this one out of clay just because it is earth we're talking about, it is land, it is division, and clay does come from the earth. And just watching, this element in my studio of listening to it tinkle and soothe at the same time create these feelings of anxiety while we looked at it was kind of a nice push and pull. Um, so every time this happens, there you go. Uh, this piece was also created around the time where I had a show at the Loyola University. It was a two-person show, and I was thinking about how 5, 6 years ago, I really wanted, to migrate to the US and become American. And I've been here 10 years and, we're still on work visas, and just dealing with this concept of loss of pride that we were all feeling at, living in the US, just the whole brokenness. And I ended up using materials that we use in construction. This piece started out in that cornhole thrower frame, like a whole flag. And I came back the next day and some of the strips had fallen off. And that's how I decided to break out of that frame again and hold this piece vertically and just use this plaster tape and these acrylic burnt stars to kind of create this feeling of loss of pride in this piece. Um, Again, I think that love for ceramics has been an on again, off again thing in the past year, just because of access to ceramic studios, which are obviously much more community spaces, and we haven't had much community in the past year. So there has been this push and pull where I really wanted to move my practice to the fourth dimension and start doing more community stuff with it. And ceramics was my way to try and do that. And that too kind of got a push back this year, but I still continue to create these vessels. They've been taking slightly different forms in some way. One of them was I I created this again pretty early on in the pandemic, but the idea was these little pods and how we're sitting in them and who we're deciding to socialize with and choosing people on their same level of care that they're taking or and even further bubbling and podding ourselves into these little groups that we were being forced to do. uh, I think I wanted to share because I guess we're still not quite ready to have community outreach programs yet, but I put together this little slide of what my passion project is going to be this year, and I would love to kind of host workshops in real life with smaller groups of people where we can build vessels. Uh, and kind of, I think a lot of us have been obsessed with bringing the green indoors this year, just kind of becoming more plant lovers and nurturing through greenery. And I think that's where this title came from, where it was called Rooted, which talks about our own concept of home. Um, I really love this little quote I found, which said, when we tell our own stories, it shapes who we are, how we grow, survive, and blossom. And that's pretty much where the title of the show came from as well. That's when we develop kinship and break through those borders and become a true community of and appreciate different points of view rather than just sitting in that little echo chamber and listening to people who say the same things that we say. And I would love to be able to sit there and burn little notes with these vessels of things we would like to let go of, whether it's our own prejudices, whether it's our own little, you know, just wanting to break out of that bubble kind of approach and root new intentions through it. So this is something I hope to do as soon as our bubbles become bigger and bigger. And that's pretty much where the presentation ends. But if you'd like, Katie, I can do a little walk through the exhibition window as well, and then maybe see if you had any questions.
I think that's a great idea.
Okay, let's do that. So this is mostly Katie's little baby and brainchild, and I love the way she set it up. I'm slightly skeptical about virtual shows, but I just love the way this offers us that opportunity of walking into a space in a slightly different way. And you can kind of browse through very slowly as you go through walls. And see how things hang. And if you click on certain pieces and then click on that little eye up there, you can get stories as to where everything came from, what the idea is. Because you can't exactly see where I scroll, but is this good?
Yeah.
I use that little ping of I've arrived and placed it on the vessels. That same little thing that shows up in Google Maps when you reach a certain place. And then there's a little hallway in here that you can walk through. And what I noticed when I was making 3D pieces was it's a little bit harder to share 3D on a 2D platform. So we ended up making little videos of all the sculptures that allows them to twirl and dance for us. You can see them from different angles. And oops, kind of do that to different pieces. I think the screens are where the video really comes in, and I'm really excited by the idea of making more movement in my work just because it's so amazing to be able to share it even on a platform like this. And then there's a little second room. And when you click on these, they kind of play for you, which I really like. I have the sound turned off right now, but it allows for sound as well. I love clicking on little pieces and zooming in and out. I think I made these around the same time that I made the little boxes pieces. It was just an extension of those, but these are very well loved. I love the little display that you did on these, Katie. I feel like they work so well.
I loved how those turned out too. They were so beautiful.
And that's our show.
Will you go back to, before you get out of it entirely, go back to the Burden of Dreams series? Because I think that's one that you didn't speak to, and that's one of my absolute favorites.
Yes, I did not touch on that. So let's go back there. So the little story behind these, it was in my older studio space where I was sharing space with an artist who worked in wax. So she was throwing away these faux brick panels which she had put wax on, and I found them and asked her if I could use them, and I started pairing them with my paintings. Um, these are again photographs that I took when I was in India of these migrant laborers that come to Bombay to earn money. They leave their homes, their villages, and they come and work there. And most of these photos are these workers working in different awkward body shapes or carrying large, heavy things on their head. And I kind of use these colors, which are very bright and kind of shape these paintings in a certain way. Uh, and each of them has that brick extension to these paintings that I try to tie into the original paintings, and subtle text that shows itself in them as well. And the frame that I decided to use on them was almost like a scaffold, again, referencing the same thing and kind of playing with those ideas. And yeah, these are some of my favorite paintings from the Burden of Dreams project that I did. But I did not cover these in my presentation just because they're slightly older, but I can see why they are your personal favorites.
Mhm. I love the way that you use the brick panels in these pieces, like where she's carrying the heavy things on her head and the brick panels are on the top, and then how they sort of meld themselves into the scenes. That is one of my favorite things about these and the shapes that you chose for them. I think that's something really special.
Thank you.
Let's see, a couple of questions that I had. Notes real quick. Okay, so in this show, we have just about every medium that I could think of. How do you think it was pulling all of that together into one concept? Like how, I know this is something we've talked about before, but would you speak to that a little bit to
So
them?
firstly, I think I would exclude video as being part of the whole thing. I feel like the video is just a kind of a by the way to showcase the installations in a better way. I don't think I'm ready enough to push my practice in the video direction yet. So I would definitely say it's mostly painting, installation, and sculptural in a certain way. Uh, I think when I want to challenge myself in my practice, I take up a new medium and it helps me process what I'm trying to say in a slightly different way. And I've always been toying with 3D, but kind of scared to explore the realm of sculpture. So I feel like in 2012 is when I took the biggest push to myself. And the other thing I didn't mention earlier is when I moved to the US, I had major visa and work permit related issues because my husband was a student and then he got a work permit. I was always on a dependent visa, which doesn't allow you to work. So for practical reasons, I was shipping work back to India constantly to have large shows. And that kind of made jumping into the 3D medium a, a little bit harder, like, just constantly taking stuff back and forth. So I kind of stuck to painting as much as possible and, you know, kind of messed around with the 3D in some space. But I feel like the more I think about it, I feel like what I'm trying to say, and I'm always, even in my paintings, with the texture and with the things that I'm trying to do, I'm trying to jump off the canvas, whether it's the faux brick panels, whether it's something. So I think after a point, I just have to stop holding myself back and allow myself to just make the work that I want to make, irrespective of the medium. Um, Sometimes we constantly thinking of the obstacles, and that doesn't allow us to push ourselves as much. And once you just pretend that there is no obstacle and kind of keep going at it, then it becomes easier. Um, what I feel like I need to work harder at is tying the actual story together of the what I'm trying to make. And there are a lot of artists I know who work in different media as long as the story calls for it. And that's pretty much where I think I'm going with this.
I think in a lot of ways, you see how these materials work into your story. And I think that that's a really beautiful like whenever you're talking about the cornhole piece and how you sort of saw that almost like a box in a way, and like you worked within that into the story you were trying to tell. And I think that that is one of the most interesting things about the mix of mediums that we have in this show. It's certainly something I find very exciting about a show.
I
um,
love the idea of picking up something that's very American and somebody else's trash and making it my art. There is something about that that I find very appealing, like just, or even working within the constraints of that, whether it be a small acrylic box or whether it be the cornhole through a frame, just kind of taking that and seeing how I can work in and around it. So that's kind of exciting for me sometimes.
I love that. That's another question I had. when working with installations, sometimes installations are important to the time and the place where they are installed. But I feel like these have been taken out of that sort of and put together. And I think they've sort of, in some way, maybe gained a little bit of different kind of meaning being put together in a place like this. How did that feel to you? Because I know that this was something that you were concerned about going into a virtual exhibition.
So I genuinely feel like when I was making this piece, I did not have a site in mind. So it was definitely not a site specific install, but I created it in and for my studio and wanted to photograph it in a way that, it could kind of be shown virtually via Instagram or via the Roaring Artist Gallery, where someone could experience that piece, because I knew that even though I was making it in the middle of 2020, it wasn't going to see a real audience for at least another year, and probably way past that whole November craziness that that piece was inspired by. But I feel like the way the American system of elections is designed, it's going to feel this way every 4 years. So it's kind of, I feel like this piece was very important last year and will kind of keep coming back in that importance. But with site specific installations, I don't think, because my installation practice is not that very old, I feel like I haven't had the opportunity to explore a specific site and make an install for that. So with these pieces, they're very generic in where they can be installed, even if it is a virtual gallery. Uh, I feel like it does still have a similar impact of what I'm trying to make.
I definitely feel like it has. I am personally, as the curator of this, so proud of what we've been able to accomplish with this. I think it's just such a beautiful, I mean, the whole thing is a story in a way. And I am so proud that Roaring Artist Gallery is able to tell that story. I think that's something really special. And I think that's something that's going to stand out as something really special for us moving forward as a gallery too. So I want to thank you, Tulika, for allowing us to show this amazing, powerful show of yours. I think it's just really special and very exciting. So, um, does anybody have any other questions before we shut this down? Or is there anything else, Tulika, that you want to share before we?
I had a question.
Okay.
Tulika, can you talk about, I have a few questions for you. Can you talk to me about, you explained so well how the stories informed the early bricks that you did in 2012. And then you touched on how in 2020 you had sort of a different approach. Can you talk a little bit about where those stories came from and how they bubbled up for you?
I think just understanding after I had my daughter, which was 5 years ago, I think that's when it dawned on me that the US is my new home. And then kind of trying to create a kinship with immigrants in the US who kind of felt the same way that I did. Are, and I've always been drawn to that community of people who moved from somewhere. And a lot of them are even artists who have moved 20 years ago and still feel the same way, that, that home is a space that's in between. And in fact, one of the artists I want to mention is Marcus, who is at CAD, and we spoke about this as well. And some of these stories I feel are just so important in trying to uh, garner a kinship for someone who moves to this country, because there is always this vibe of the immigrant being the outsider. And that's the sentiment I think I'm trying to fight in these brick pieces, where it is a country made out of immigrants and it is so rich because it is of its diversity. And, these are people who are still, after 20 years of being here, occasionally made to feel like outsiders. So these stories are really very subtle sentiments that I have seen in people I've spoken to and how they relate to who I am and my own personal experience of being an outsider, or being made to feel like an outsider occasionally. And that's pretty much, I feel like the bricks are going to be a never ending project for me. There are a lot of artists who journal in books and who kind of, have a different way of writing the way they do. For me, I write on these bricks. So they just keep evolving in, I think the huge difference between 2012 and 2020 and how I arranged them. Uh, and this time they took that function of walls and bridges, just because I was thinking a lot about that when I was thinking about this immigrant community.
That's great. Makes a lot of sense. I was also thinking when you were talking about the sort of repurposing of items that you found, that in some ways you're kind of like exploring the stories of those items too, in just a small way. And I'm kind of curious, like as you find or gather these items, or they're given to you or left with you, like how much do you consider the story behind an item, like as far as you know, and does that factor into like what you do with it?
That's a really great question. I feel like sometimes when I find something, it sits in my studio for months slash years before I find something I want to do with it. And case in point being the cornhole thrower frames. I think they sat in my studio for the longest time, and and Michelle was there. Sorry, Michelle being someone in the studio space, and she was there when she saw me take them off, saying, "Oh my God, they're really great frames." I was like, "I have no idea what I'm going to do with them, but I want to keep them." And the fact that they come from a game or a toy sometimes helps me to relate to them a little bit more. Even the little acrylic boxes, I know I had them for at least a couple of years before I made the little pieces in them. And I definitely agree with you. I don't think I think so much about the story of that while deciding what piece goes in it, but I do consider what it's made out of, how strong it is, the size of it, and that kind of informs what I'm going to put in it or around it, not necessarily what is it's going to be, so to speak.
Right. Right. Yeah. I can just see though that at some point, like the idea of a narrative, whatever it is, even if it's just a word or a sentence, but the idea of a narrative that's associated with an item gets you beyond like just formally making something into something that's in your head and that you think about, and that with your practice, it's so clear that you're carrying these stories with you or trying to recreate or create them. And it seems like more than just having a formal piece, that you have like an interest in kind of crafting like a story of migration, in a sense, like the items themselves are migrating, right? They're moving from home to house to garbage or wherever, and along the way they kind of like have a chapter with you before they become something else. And I think there's something pretty beautiful. Last question. Are you still making work with Reina, or is that just a COVID thing? Because I love those pieces.
I hope to keep making pieces with Reina. Reina is so obsessive in her drawing, and I'm a mom who curates her work, so I go through a pile of 500 drawings and keep 10. So I know it's terrible, but what you're gonna do? And I'm collecting them. I don't know exactly where that's gonna go, but I think everyone who's a mom can relate to this. In terms of curating their child's art or just dumping it. But she's definitely super awesome in the detail that she uses. And I'm hoping to keep pushing these pieces in a certain way. And uh, part of me was thinking about making them three-dimensional now, with drawings on the inside and drawings on the outside, and creating 3D houses with them. Uh, and just all these ideas that I'm sitting on and hoping that they take life sometime soon.
Beautiful. Really well said. Thank you so much. It's a beautiful exhibition too. Really well put together and thoughtful. So really great job,
Thank you
both of
so
you.
much, Mike.
Of course.
There, there's just so much food for thought that comes out of these questions as well, that turns into a little mini crit. And thank you for that.
I've got more, but I don't want to waste your time though. I'll follow up with you later.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. And Thank you to everyone who is going to be watching this afterwards. Storytelling is going to be at roaringartistgallery.com through May 9th. So it can be seen there through May 9th. And of course, we'll have this to be able to live on in order to see it in the future. That's one thing I love about virtual, that we can get to keep it and it doesn't go away. um,
And we'll save the hugs that we can't have for later.
yes. I'm looking forward to when we can. As much as I love, obviously, having a virtual gallery, as much as I love the virtual world, I'll be very happy when we can see things in person again. But in the meantime, I'm really enjoying the challenge of being able to show these kinds of mediums and these kinds of shows in a virtual space. And I think it's really exciting that we got to do this with you. So thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who was here, and thank you to everyone who will come and view us later. This is Katie Bradford Osborne once again from Roaring Artist Gallery, and we thank you so much. All right, bye.